What if I told you that there's a type of man who operates by a completely different set of rules? A man who doesn't seek validation, doesn't follow trends, and refuses to bend his principles for anyone or anything. Welcome to the world of the Sigma male, the most misunderstood and perhaps most feared archetype in modern society. While alphas fight for dominance and betas seek acceptance, Sigmas walk a path that most men can't even comprehend. They've discovered something that threatens the very foundation of social hierarchies, true independence. And that's exactly why they're feared by those who need others to play by conventional rules. In today's video, we're diving deep into the psychology of why Sigmas remain unchanged by external pressures, how this unwavering nature creates both respect and fear, and why understanding this principle is crucial for any man seeking authentic strength. If you've ever felt like you don't fit into society's predetermined boxes, if you've been called difficult for standing your ground, or if you're tired of compromising your values for others' comfort, this message is for you. By the end of this exploration, you'll understand not just what makes Sigmas different, but why their refusal to change is actually their greatest strength. And if this resonates with your journey, make sure to subscribe to Official Sigma Male. We're building a community of men who choose authenticity over acceptance, and your voice matters in this conversation. The immovable foundation. The first thing you need to understand about Sigma males is that their resistance to change isn't born from stubbornness or arrogance. It comes from something far more powerful, an unshakable foundation built on deep self-knowledge and unwavering principles. While most men spend their lives shifting and adapting to please others, the Sigma has done the inner work that most never even attempt. This foundation begins with radical self-awareness. A true Sigma has spent countless hours in introspection, not the superficial kind that comes from social media self-help, but the brutal, honest examination of who he really is beneath all the social conditioning and expectations. He knows his strengths, acknowledges his weaknesses, and most importantly, he's identified his non-negotiable values, the core principles that define his character. Consider the example of Steve Jobs, a classic Sigma archetype. Throughout his career, he faced immense pressure to conform to industry standards, to play nice with competitors, to compromise his vision for market acceptance. Yet he remained steadfast in his belief that technology should be beautiful, intuitive, and revolutionary. This wasn't mere stubbornness. It was a man operating from a foundation so solid that external pressures couldn't shake it. The Sigma's foundation is built on three pillars: authentic self-knowledge, defined personal values, and acceptance of personal responsibility. Unlike other archetypes who derive their identity from external validation or social positioning, the Sigma's sense of self comes from within. He's not trying to prove anything to anyone because he's already proven everything to himself. This internal validation creates what psychologists call internal locus of control, the belief that you are the primary agent of your own destiny. When you truly believe this, when you've tested it through experience and seen the results, you become incredibly difficult to manipulate or coerce. You don't change because someone wants you to. You only change when you determine it serves your authentic growth. The practical manifestation of this foundation is visible in how Sigmas handle pressure situations. While others bend, negotiate, or compromise their principles for temporary peace or advantage, the Sigma remains consistent. This isn't about being inflexible. It's about having standards that aren't subject to market conditions or social pressure. For instance, a Sigma in a corporate environment won't participate in office politics or change his work ethic to fit in with a lazy team culture. He'll maintain his standards regardless of whether it makes him popular or helps him climb the ladder faster. This consistency often makes others uncomfortable because it highlights their own willingness to compromise their values for convenience. The immovable foundation also manifests in personal relationships. A Sigma won't change his personality, interests, or goals to keep a romantic partner or maintain friendships. He understands that any relationship requiring him to be someone other than his authentic self is built on false premises and destined to fail. This approach initially seems harsh, but it actually creates deeper, more meaningful connections with people who appreciate authenticity. What makes this foundation truly powerful is that it's not static, it's dynamic within its own parameters. A Sigma will evolve, learn and grow, but always in alignment with his core identity. He doesn't change who he is, he becomes more of who he already is. This distinction is crucial because it separates genuine growth from reactive adaptation. The fear that others feel toward this immovable foundation stems from its implications. If one man can live authentically without seeking approval, what does that say about everyone else's choices? The Sigma's existence is a mirror that reflects the compromises others have made, and most people don't like what they see in that reflection. This foundation becomes the source of the Sigma's power and the reason for others' fear. It represents something most people have never experienced: complete autonomy over one's own life and choices. In a world where most people are controlled by their need for acceptance, approval, and external validation, a man who operates from genuine internal authority becomes both inspiring and threatening. Why change threatens the status quo? The second principle that makes Sigmas feared is their understanding of how their unwillingness to change disrupts the entire social ecosystem. Every society, organization, and social group operates on predictable patterns of behavior, and these patterns depend heavily on people's willingness to adapt, conform, and modify themselves to maintain harmony. When a Sigma refuses to play by these unwritten rules, he doesn't just stand out. He threatens the very foundation of how these systems operate. Think about it from a systemic perspective. Social hierarchies, corporate structures, and even family dynamics rely on the assumption that individuals will adjust their behavior based on social pressure, rewards, and consequences. The alpha maintains his position by expecting others to defer to his dominance. The beta finds his place by accepting a subordinate role and adapting accordingly. But the Sigma, he operates outside this entire framework, and that's what makes him dangerous to the status quo. Consider the corporate world, where this dynamic plays out most clearly. Companies invest billions in creating cultures that encourage conformity, not just in work output, but in thinking patterns, social interactions, and even personal expression. They create elaborate systems of rewards and punishments designed to shape behavior. Most employees, regardless of their natural archetype, learn to read these signals and adjust accordingly. They modify their communication style for different. Managers adapt their work approach to match team expectations and even alter their personalities to fit the corporate culture. But when a Sigma enters this environment, he disrupts the entire equation. He doesn't adapt his communication style. He communicates authentically and expects others to adjust if they want to work with him effectively. He doesn't modify his work approach based on team dynamics. He works according to his standards and principles, regardless of whether it fits the established pattern. This consistency isn't rebellion, it's simply how he operates, but the effect on the system is revolutionary. Take the example of Elon Musk in various corporate and industry settings. Throughout his career, he's consistently refused to adapt to established industry norms, whether in the automotive industry with Tesla, space exploration with SpaceX, or social media with Twitter. His refusal to change his approach based on industry, expectations, or conventional wisdom has disrupted entire sectors. This isn't because he's trying to be disruptive. It's because he operates from his own internal compass rather than external expectations. The threat this poses to the status quo goes beyond simple non-conformity. When a Sigma maintains his authentic behavior regardless of social pressure, he inadvertently exposes the artificial nature of much social conditioning. His consistency highlights how much others are constantly adapting and changing themselves, often in ways that compromise their authentic nature. This creates an uncomfortable mirror effect that makes people question their own choices. In relationships, this dynamic becomes even more pronounced. Most romantic relationships operate on an implicit negotiation system where both parties gradually adjust their behavior, interests, and even values to maintain harmony and connection. This isn't necessarily unhealthy. Compromise is often essential for relationships. But when one person, the Sigma, refuses to participate in this constant adaptation, it forces everyone else to confront their own willingness to change for others' approval. The fear this generates isn't just about individual discomfort. It's about systemic stability. Leaders fear Sigmas because they can't be controlled through traditional means. You can't motivate a Sigma with promises of social status because he doesn't derive his identity from social positioning. You can't pressure him with threats of social exclusion because he's comfortable with solitude. You can't manipulate him with rewards that require him to compromise his principles because his principles aren't negotiable. This resistance to traditional control mechanisms forces systems to either adapt to accommodate the Sigma's authenticity or to expend enormous energy trying to suppress or eliminate him. Neither option is comfortable for those invested in maintaining existing power structures. Accommodation means changing the system itself, while suppression requires acknowledging that the system can't handle authentic individuality. Both outcomes threaten the status quo. The ripple effects of a Sigma's presence extend beyond his immediate sphere. When others observe someone living authentically without negative consequences, and often with remarkable success, it plants seeds of possibility in their minds. They begin to question why they've been adapting and changing so much for others' comfort. This questioning can lead to broader social shifts as more people begin to prioritize authenticity over acceptance. Historical examples abound of individuals whose refusal to change challenged entire systems. Think of figures like Henry David Thoreau, who refused to pay taxes supporting slavery and instead went to jail, maintaining his principles regardless of social pressure. Or consider Steve Jobs' refusal to adapt Apple's design philosophy to match industry standards, ultimately forcing the entire tech industry to evolve to meet his vision rather than the other way around. The modern workplace provides countless examples of this dynamic. When a Sigma employee refuses to participate in office politics, maintains professional boundaries regardless of social pressure, and continues to work according to his standards rather than adapting to dysfunctional team dynamics, he often becomes a lightning rod for both admiration and resentment. Colleagues admire his authenticity, but fear the implications of his example for their own behavioral choices. What makes this particularly threatening to established systems is that the Sigma's approach often proves more effective than traditional adaptation strategies. When someone maintains consistent standards and authentic behavior, they often achieve better results than those who constantly adapt to please others. This success validates the Sigma's approach and further threatens the assumption that adaptation and conformity are necessary for success. The status quo depends on predictability, and the Sigma's refusal to change makes him fundamentally unpredictable within conventional frameworks. You can't predict how he'll respond to typical social pressures because those pressures don't influence his decision-making process. This unpredictability makes him difficult to manage, control, or incorporate into existing systems without those systems themselves changing to accommodate his authenticity. The fear of unpredictability. The third element that makes Sigmas genuinely feared is their fundamental unpredictability within conventional social frameworks. Most people operate according to readable patterns. They respond to social cues, adjust behavior based on consequences, and make decisions influenced by group dynamics. But Sigmas operate from internal logic that others can't easily decode, making them wild cards in any social equation. This unpredictability isn't random chaos. It's the natural result of making decisions based on internal principles rather than external pressures. When someone's behavior isn't governed by the need for approval, fear of rejection, or desire for social advancement, their responses become impossible to predict using conventional social mathematics. Consider workplace dynamics. Most employees can be influenced through predictable levers: praise for good behavior, criticism for poor performance, social inclusion for conformity, exclusion for deviation. Managers learn to read these patterns and use them to guide team behavior. But with a Sigma, these traditional influence methods don't work because his decision-making process operates independently of social feedback loops. A Sigma might reject a promotion if it requires compromising his principles, even when everyone expects him to accept for career advancement. He might speak unpopular truths in meetings when others expect diplomatic silence. He might maintain professional boundaries when others expect social flexibility. This creates anxiety in those who need to predict and control outcomes. The unpredictability extends to personal relationships. In romantic contexts, most people follow recognizable patterns. They pursue when shown interest, retreat when faced with rejection, modify behavior based on partner feedback. But Sigmas don't operate according to these social scripts. They might remain completely unaffected by typical relationship manipulation tactics, or they might end seemingly good relationships if they detect fundamental incompatibility. This creates deep insecurity in others because it renders their social skills and manipulation strategies useless. People who've built their identity around their ability to read and influence others suddenly find themselves dealing with someone who doesn't respond to their usual toolkit. It's like trying to use a remote control on a device that operates on a completely different frequency. Strength through consistency. The fourth principle reveals how a Sigma's refusal to change becomes his greatest source of power. While others exhaust themselves constantly adapting to different situations, people, and expectations, the Sigma conserves his energy by maintaining consistent principles and behavior patterns. This consistency isn't just admirable, it's strategically superior in almost every context. Think about the energy most people waste on constant adaptation. They have one personality at work, another with friends, and yet another with family. They modify their opinions based on who's listening, adjust their values based on what's convenient, and change their standards based on what others will accept. This constant shifting requires enormous mental and emotional energy while creating internal fragmentation and stress. The Sigma operates differently. He has one authentic self that he presents consistently across all contexts. This doesn't mean he's inflexible or socially inappropriate. He simply maintains his core identity while adapting his communication style to be effective in different situations. He's the same person, whether he's in a boardroom, at a family dinner, or alone with his thoughts. This consistency creates several powerful advantages. First, it builds trust. People know exactly what they're getting with a Sigma because he doesn't change based on circumstances. His word means something because his principles aren't subject to situational modification. In business, this translates to reliability that others can count on. In relationships, it creates security that partners rarely experience with others. Second, consistency eliminates internal conflict. When your actions align with your values, regardless of external pressure, you experience what psychologists call cognitive consonance, the peace that comes from living authentically. While others struggle with guilt, regret, and internal contradictions from compromising themselves, the Sigma maintains clear conscience and focused energy. The price of authenticity. The fifth principle acknowledges that the Sigma's refusal to change comes with significant costs that most people aren't willing to pay. Understanding these costs is crucial because they explain why so few men achieve this level of authentic independence, and why those who do are both admired and feared. The first price is social isolation. When you refuse to adapt to group dynamics, modify your personality for acceptance, or compromise your principles for inclusion, you will inevitably find yourself on the outside of many social circles. The Sigma accepts this isolation not because he enjoys loneliness, but because he recognizes that shallow connections based on false versions of himself are ultimately meaningless. Career limitations represent another significant cost. Many professional advancement opportunities require political maneuvering, strategic relationships, and willingness to compromise principles for organizational goals. The Sigma who refuses to play these games often finds his career progress slower than peers who are willing to adapt and conform. Relationship challenges form the third major cost. Most people expect their partners to change and grow together, which often means mutual adaptation and compromise. When a Sigma refuses to change fundamental aspects of himself for relationship harmony, he faces higher relationship turnover and difficulty finding compatible partners who appreciate authenticity over adaptability. Mastering the art of selective evolution. The sixth and final principle reveals the sophisticated truth about how Sigmas actually do change, but only on their own terms and according to their own internal compass. This isn't about stubborn inflexibility. It's about intelligent selectivity in personal evolution. True Sigmas understand the difference between changing who they are and becoming more of who they already are. They engage in constant self-improvement, learning, and growth, but always in alignment with their core identity and values. They evolve their skills, expand their knowledge, and refine their approaches. But they don't alter their fundamental character to please others. This selective evolution is perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Sigma psychology. It requires the wisdom to distinguish between valuable growth opportunities and pressure to conform, the strength to pursue difficult personal development while resisting social manipulation, and the intelligence to evolve strategically rather than reactively. A Sigma might spend years developing emotional intelligence, not because others demand it, but because he recognizes it will make him more effective in achieving his goals. He might learn new communication skills, not to fit in better, but to express his authentic thoughts more clearly. He might develop leadership abilities not for status, but because leadership serves his mission. This approach to change is what makes Sigmas ultimately unstoppable. They combine the strength of unchanging principles with the adaptability of continuous self-improvement. They're not rigid, they're selectively flexible, changing what serves their authentic growth while maintaining what defines their character. The journey of understanding why Sigmas don't change for anyone isn't just about recognizing a personality type. It's about understanding a fundamental truth about human nature and power dynamics. Throughout history, those who refuse to bend have always been both revered and feared, because they represent something most people secretly wish they could be: truly free. A Sigma's unwillingness to change isn't stubbornness or arrogance. It's the natural result of deep self-knowledge and unshakable principles. When you know who you are at your core, when your values aren't negotiable, and when your self-worth doesn't depend on others' opinions, you become something rare in this world, genuinely unpredictable and impossible to control. This is why Sigmas are feared, not because they're aggressive or confrontational, but because they represent a threat to systems that depend on compliance and predictability. They show others what's possible when you refuse to compromise your authentic self, and that reality makes many people uncomfortable with their own choices. The 6 principles we've explored today, from building an immovable foundation to mastering selective evolution, aren't just concepts to understand intellectually. They're tools for transformation, guidelines for building a life of authentic strength and purposeful independence. Remember, the goal isn't to become inflexible or closed-minded. It's to develop such a strong sense of self that external pressures can't shake your foundation. It's about evolving on your own terms, not changing to meet others' expectations. If this exploration has opened your eyes to the power of unwavering authenticity, I encourage you to subscribe to Official Sigma Male. We're not just sharing content. We're building a movement of men who understand that true strength comes from within, and that the most powerful thing you can do in a world that demands conformity is to remain authentically yourself. Your journey matters, and this community is here to support your path to genuine independence.